October 19, 2023. Somewhere in the northern Red Sea, a 28-year-old American destroyer picks up contacts on radar, not one or two, but an estimated 35 inbound weapons streaking north toward Israel. Over the next 10 hours, USS Carney will engage wave after wave of cruise missiles and explosive drones in the most intense naval combat action since World War II. The ship's commanding officer came down to the Combat Information Center around 5:30 in the afternoon. He would not leave until 2 in the morning. What happened that night should have been a triumphant validation of everything the U.S. Navy had built since the Cold War. The Aegis combat system performed flawlessly. The crew executed perfectly. Not a single enemy weapon came within 5 miles of the ship. And yet, buried in the statistics of that victory, was a problem so fundamental, it would force the Pentagon to rethink decades of naval doctrine. This is the story of what happens when a $2 billion warship faces an enemy whose cheapest weapons cost less than a used car, and what that collision reveals about the future of naval combat. If modern military technology interests you, consider subscribing and dropping a like. It genuinely helps the channel grow. Now let's break this down. To understand why USS Carney's deployment matters beyond the immediate headlines, we need to examine what each side brought to this fight. USS Carney is a Flight 1 Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer, the backbone of American naval power projection for 3 decades. At her core sits the Aegis combat system, built around 4 fixed ANSPY-1D phased array radar panels that can simultaneously track hundreds of targets across a 360-degree field. The ship carries 90 vertical launch system cells loaded with some of the most sophisticated missiles ever built. Standard Missile 2 interceptors for air defense, Standard Missile 6 variants with extended range and terminal guidance, Tomahawk cruise missiles for land attack. And in the cells of ships like Carney, SM-3 interceptors designed to destroy ballistic missiles outside Earth's atmosphere. The system was designed during the Cold War to defend carrier battle groups against Soviet bomber swarms launching anti-ship missiles. Everything about Aegis assumes high-value, high-complexity threats arriving in coordinated attacks. The Houthis presented something different. Their arsenal, supplied and designed with significant Iranian assistance, includes a mix of weapon types that span the entire threat spectrum. At the high end, they possess anti-ship ballistic missiles, weapons that approach targets at Mach 5 to Mach 6, giving ship crews somewhere between 9 and 20 seconds from detection to impact. These are serious threats. Commander Jeremy Robertson, Carney's commanding officer, described the engagement window as very fast, very dynamic. But the Houthis also field weapons at the opposite extreme. Iranian-designed Shahed pattern drones, slow-moving, propeller-driven aircraft packed with explosives, cost somewhere between $2,000 to $50,000 to manufacture. They fly at perhaps 100 miles per hour. They carry no sophisticated countermeasures. In a one-on-one engagement against an Aegis destroyer, they have essentially zero chance of survival. And that's precisely the point. Because here is the question that would come to define Carney's entire deployment. What happens when you design a weapons system to defeat advanced Soviet missiles, then face an enemy who can afford to lose 1,000 drones for every one of your interceptors? The SM-2 standard missile costs approximately $2.1 million per round. The SM-6, with its enhanced capabilities, runs about $4.3 million. The SM-3 ballistic missile interceptor, which Carney would eventually fire in combat for the first time in history, costs between $9.6 and $27.9 million, depending on the variant. Standard Navy doctrine fires 2 interceptors at each incoming threat to ensure destruction. Do the math on a 14-drone wave, the kind Carney faced on December 16, 2023, and you are looking at nearly $60 million in missiles expended against targets that might have cost the Houthis a few $100,000 total. The Australian Strategic Policy Institute would later put it bluntly. The mathematics of the Red Sea engagements is stark. Deploying these interceptors against a tide of inexpensive, mass-produced drones, while effective, is not worth the cost. But effectiveness still mattered on that first night, and the Aegis system delivered. When the first Houthi barrage arrived on October 19th, Carney's combat systems performed exactly as decades of engineering intended. The SPY-1D radar detected the incoming wave. Cruise missiles and drones launched from Houthi territory in Yemen, heading north toward Israel through international waters where Carney was operating. The Aegis weapon system calculated firing solutions, prioritized threats, and began sequencing launches from the vertical launch cells. Over the next 9 to 10 hours, Carney destroyed 4 land attack cruise missiles and 15 drones. The crew had never experienced anything like it. Gunner's mate First Class Charles Curry, manning the 5-inch deck gun, later recalled, "We had never done anything like this before. We had only trained to it. There was a lot of adrenaline going on. This was real world now." That engagement set a pattern that would repeat 50 more times over the following 7 months. The operational rhythm became grimly predictable. Houthis would launch weapons, sometimes targeting commercial ships, sometimes firing toward Israel, occasionally aiming directly at Carney herself. The destroyer would detect, track, and engage. Missiles would fly, targets would be destroyed. What made Carney's situation tactically unique was the sheer variety of threats. Unlike training scenarios that typically focus on a single threat type, the crew had to switch constantly between engagement profiles. Some slow drones required different solutions than cruise missiles. Anti-ship ballistic missiles demanded split-second decisions with almost no margin for error. On January 26, 2024, a Houthi anti-ship ballistic missile was fired directly at USS Carney, the first confirmed direct targeting of an American warship. The crew had seconds to respond. They succeeded. 4 days later, on January 30, 2024, Carney used an SM-6 missile to intercept another anti-ship ballistic missile. This was the first publicly confirmed SM-6 combat intercept in history. The cost of that single defensive shot was approximately $4.3 million. Then came April 13, 2024. Iran launched roughly 170 drones, 30 cruise missiles, and 120 ballistic missiles at Israel in retaliation for an Israeli strike on an Iranian diplomatic facility in Syria. Carney and her sister ship USS Arleigh Burke fired SM-3 interceptors. They destroyed Iranian ballistic missiles outside Earth's atmosphere. This was the first combat use of SM-3 in history. The weapons worked. But behind these tactical successes, a logistics crisis was building. Commander Robertson was asked whether he ever faced pressure to conserve missiles given their cost. His answer was revealing. "Not once. I'm entrusted with this $2 billion asset and 300+ lives, and so the cost-benefit analysis to me shooting a missile is absolutely in my wheelhouse, and I'll do it all day and twice on Sunday." The problem was not that the commander was wrong to protect his ship. The problem was that this calculation, replicated across every destroyer in the Red Sea, was draining the Navy's missile stockpiles at an unsustainable rate. Standard missiles are too large to transfer at sea. When Carney's vertical launch cells ran low, she had to pull into port to reload. The Navy does not publicly disclose exact figures, but photographs showed empty VLS tubes during media visits to the ship. Every missile fired meant one fewer missile available for the next engagement, or for the next crisis somewhere else in the world. By April 2024, Navy Secretary Carlos Del Toro testified that the service was closely approaching $1 billion in expenditures for munitions since October. By January 2025, the Navy had fired 120 SM-2 missiles, 80 SM-6 missiles, and 20 combined ESSM and SM-3 missiles in the Red Sea campaign, more air defense missiles in 15 months than the service had fired in the previous 30 years combined. Since you've made it this far, you're clearly interested in how modern naval warfare actually works. Please hit subscribe and drop a like. It helps the channel produce more content like this. All right, let's get back to the operational picture. The Navy recognized the cost exchange problem almost immediately, and they adapted. USS Carney's 5-inch deck gun, a weapon designed primarily for shore bombardment, became an unexpected star of the deployment. Against slower-moving drones, the Mark 45 gun could engage targets at a fraction of the cost of a missile. Firing 16 to 20 rounds per minute, with each shell costing dramatically less than an SM-2 missile, the gun offered a way to defeat low-end threats without bankrupting the magazine. Commander Robertson's crew used the 5-inch gun extensively. The problem was range and engagement envelope. The gun could not reach threats at the distances where missiles excelled. and it could not engage the faster cruise missiles or ballistic weapons at all. The Navy also accelerated deployment of other lower-cost solutions. A PKWS laser-guided rockets, originally designed for ground attack, were adapted for air defense at roughly $35,000 per round. Fighter aircraft from the carrier Eisenhower used Sidewinder missiles at around $500,000 each, expensive but far cheaper than ship-launched interceptors for certain threat types. These adaptations helped, but they could not solve the fundamental asymmetry. The Houthis, backed by Iranian logistics and manufacturing expertise, were resupplying faster than coalition forces could destroy their capabilities. Washington Institute analyst Michael Knights observed that Houthi forces seemed to have an inexhaustible supply of weapons. Offensive strikes against Houthi positions in Yemen, including Tomahawk missiles fired by USS Carney herself, degraded but never eliminated the launch capacity. Vice Admiral George Wickoff acknowledged in August 2024 that the American and British approach had failed to dissuade the Houthis and stop attacks on shipping. President Biden admitted the strikes had not deterred attacks, but pledged to continue them anyway. Meanwhile, the human cost of sustained combat operations was becoming apparent across the fleet. Carney's crew performed extraordinarily. 0 casualties, 0 damage to the ship. Commander Robertson attributed part of this to what he called battle luck, the intangible factor that separates ships that emerge unscathed from those that do not. But other vessels were not so fortunate in different ways. The USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group's 2025 deployment revealed 4 preventable mishaps costing over $100 million, attributed partly to extreme fatigue from extended combat operations. On December 22, 2024, USS Gettysburg mistakenly engaged a friendly F-18 Super Hornet, misidentifying it as a Houthi drone. Investigators found watchstanders had been on duty for over 9 hours. RAND analyst Bradley Martin concluded that the clear message from this deployment is that the Navy is not ready to deal with the reality of extended combat. Carney avoided these problems. Her crew maintained what Robertson called a battle mindset throughout the 7-month deployment. But Carney was one ship. The broader campaign required rotating multiple destroyers through the theater, each facing the same operational pressures, each burning through the same finite missile stocks. So what did USS Carney's deployment actually prove? First, the technology works. Aegis performed exactly as designed against threats ranging from simple drones to sophisticated ballistic missiles. The SM-6 and SM-3 interceptors, never before used in combat, destroyed their targets. The crew integration between radar operators, weapons coordinators, and commanding officers functioned under pressure that no training exercise could fully replicate. When a warship needed to defend itself and others, the systems delivered. Second, the humans work. More than 300 sailors maintained combat readiness for 7 months, executing 51 engagements without a single friendly casualty or significant equipment failure. The Navy's training pipeline produced operators who could transition from peacetime steaming to active combat in hours. That institutional capability proved just as important as the hardware. Third, and this is the uncomfortable truth, the economics do not work. Not at scale, not against an adversary who can manufacture threats faster than defenders can afford to destroy them. The Center for Strategic and International Studies pushed back against simple cost ratio arguments, noting that what matters is not the price of the interceptor versus the price of the drone, but the value of what is being protected. A $2 billion destroyer and 300 lives justify expensive defensive measures. A container ship carrying $1 billion in cargo justifies expensive defensive measures. But this argument, while valid, does not change the math. Magazine capacity is finite. Production rates for SM-6 missiles cannot scale overnight. Every interceptor fired in the Red Sea is one fewer missile available for potential conflicts elsewhere, for instance in the Taiwan Strait, where the threat environment would be exponentially more demanding. The Navy's fiscal year 2025 budget requested $6.6 billion for critical munitions, specifically to address the stockpile concerns exposed by Red Sea operations. Directed energy weapons, which offer nearly unlimited magazines and a cost per shot measured in dollars rather than millions, have moved from research curiosity to urgent priority. USS Carney came home to Naval Station Mayport on May 20, 2024. She received the Navy Unit Commendation, the service's second highest unit award. Her commanding officer delivered lectures at the Naval War College, sharing combat lessons with the next generation of surface warfare officers. The ship is now in post-deployment maintenance. The crew has rotated. The Red Sea mission continues under other vessels. When Commander Robertson stood in his Combat Information Center on October 19, 2023, he faced a test that no American destroyer crew had experienced in nearly 80 years. 51 engagements later, he and his crew had written new doctrine in real time, proving what works, exposing what does not, and forcing hard conversations about the future of naval warfare. 7 months of continuous combat. 65 Houthi targets destroyed. $1 billion in missiles expended across the broader campaign. 0 American casualties aboard Carney. The Aegis system was designed to win engagements. It did. But winning engagements and winning wars are different problems. The question USS Carney's deployment leaves unanswered is not whether American technology can defeat Iranian drones. It clearly can. The question is whether the economics of that victory can scale to the conflicts ahead. The missiles work, the math does not. That is the lesson the Navy is now racing to solve. If you found this breakdown valuable, subscribing really does help the channel continue producing detailed content like this. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I would be curious whether you think the cost asymmetry problem is solvable. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.